The town of Greenwood was quiet, nestled among rolling hills and dense forests. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where life moved slowly, undisturbed by the outside world. But tonight, something changed. In the heart of the forest, a strange, shimmering light illuminated the clearing. The trees, tall and ancient, seemed to bow to its presence. From the sky, a sleek, silver spacecraft descended, silent and graceful, landing gently on the soft earth. As the light dimmed, the hatch opened, and Lyra stepped out. Lyra, with her ethereal beauty and ageless features, was a stark contrast to the natural world around her. Her skin was a striking shade of blue, marking her as distinctly otherworldly. Her eyes, deep and knowing, scanned the area, taking in her surroundings. This was her first step on Earth, a planet so unlike her own. She had been sent here with a purpose, a mission to preserve her species, now on the brink of extinction. Her kind had long since lost the ability to feel, to connect emotionally. Their survival depended on her finding a way to rekindle that spark, and Earth, with its complex and vibrant emotional landscape, was the key. As Lyra took her first steps on Earth, she sensed the life around her, the rustling of leaves, the distant calls of night creatures, the coolness of the night air. It was all so different from the sterile, controlled environments she was used to. Here, everything felt alive, pulsating with energy she had never known. Meanwhile, not far from the clearing, Ethan wandered the forest. He was a curious boy, drawn to the woods by their mysteries and the solace they provided. The night was his time, when the world felt still and quiet, a perfect contrast to the bustling life of his small town. As he walked, he noticed a strange glow ahead. It wasn't the soft light of the moon or the distant glow of fireflies. This was something else, something that pulled him closer. Intrigued, Ethan moved toward the clearing, his heart beating faster with each step. When he reached the edge of the trees, he froze. There, standing in the clearing, was a figure unlike anything he had ever seen. She was tall, elegant, and her entire being seemed to radiate a soft, otherworldly light. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Who or what was she? Lyra, sensing his presence, turned slowly to face him. Her gaze met his, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Ethan felt a mix of awe and fear, his mind racing to make sense of what he was seeing. Lyra, on the other hand, was curious. This boy, with his wide eyes and innocent expression, was different from the beings she had studied from afar. There was a warmth in his gaze, something she had never encountered before. Who are you?" Ethan finally managed to whisper, his voice trembling slightly. Lyra hesitated, her mind processing the language, trying to find the right words. "I am." "Lyra," she replied, her voice soft but clear, with a faint, melodic quality. Ethan took a hesitant step forward, his curiosity outweighing his fear. "Where did you come from? Are you an alien?" Lyra nodded slowly, unsure how much to reveal. "Yes, I am from another world. I am here on a mission." "A mission?" Ethan echoed, his fear gradually giving way to fascination. "What kind of mission?" "To understand," Lyra answered, her gaze never leaving his. "To learn about your world and your people." Ethan felt a strange connection forming between them, something he couldn't quite explain. He wanted to know more, to understand this mysterious being who had suddenly appeared in his life. But before he could ask more questions, a distant sound broke the silence, the rustling of leaves, footsteps approaching. "We have to go," Ethan said urgently, glancing over his shoulder. "The town. They might come looking. They'll be scared if they find you." Lyra sensed the urgency in his voice, the unspoken fear of discovery. She knew she couldn't afford to be seen, not yet. "Show me where to go," she said, her tone more of a request than a command. Without thinking, Ethan grabbed her hand, leading her deeper into the forest, away from the clearing and the approaching footsteps. Lyra followed, surprised by the warmth of his touch, the connection that seemed to pass between them. It was a feeling she couldn't quite describe, something new and unfamiliar. As they moved through the trees, the town of Greenwood stirred with unease. Some had seen the strange lights in the forest. Others had heard the distant hum of an engine unlike any they knew. Whispers of something unusual spread quickly, and soon a small group of townsfolk decided to investigate. But by the time they reached the clearing, it was empty. The light had faded, and there was no sign of anything unusual, just the quiet night and the rustling leaves. They searched for a while, their torches cutting through the darkness, but found nothing. Reluctantly, they returned to the town, carrying with them a sense of unease, a feeling that something was not quite right. Meanwhile, Ethan and Lyra had found a small cave near the edge of the forest, hidden from view. They sat in silence for a while, the events of the night weighing heavily on them both. Ethan's mind raced with questions, while Lyra tried to process the emotions she had felt: the fear, the curiosity, and something else, something that tugged at her in a way she didn't understand. "Thank you," Lyra said softly, breaking the silence, "for helping me." Ethan nodded, still trying to comprehend everything that had happened. "I don't know what's going on, but I think you're in danger. If the town finds out about you, they won't understand." Lyra looked at him, sensing the truth in his words. "I will stay hidden," she agreed, "but I need your help, Ethan. I need to understand your world, your people. It's the only way I can complete my mission." Ethan hesitated, unsure of what he was agreeing to. But something in Lyra's gaze made him want to help her, to protect her from whatever dangers she might face. "I'll help you," he said finally, "but we have to be careful. No one else can know about this." Lyra nodded, grateful for his support. "I understand." As the night deepened, they sat together in the cave, both feeling the weight of what lay ahead. For Ethan, it was the beginning of a journey he could never have imagined, one that would change his life forever. And for Lyra, it was the first step in a mission that would test everything she thought she knew about herself and the world she had come to. But for now they rested, the forest around them quiet and still, as if holding its breath for what was to come. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the trees, casting a warm glow over the forest. Ethan woke up to the sound of birds chirping and the rustling of leaves. For a moment he wondered if everything from the previous night had been a dream, but when he turned, he saw Lyra sitting quietly, gazing out into the forest. "Good morning," Ethan said softly, sitting up. Lyra turned to him, her expression calm but thoughtful. "Good morning," she replied, her voice as soft as the morning breeze. Ethan rubbed his eyes, still trying to make sense of everything. "We need to get you somewhere safe," he said, thinking aloud. "The town will be looking for anything unusual. We can't stay out here forever." Lyra nodded, understanding the need for caution. "Where can I go?" she asked, her gaze steady. Ethan thought for a moment. "My house," he said finally. "I can hide you there, at least for a while. My family, they won't notice if we're careful." It was a risky plan, but it was the best one he could think of. Lyra needed to stay hidden, and his house was the safest place he could offer. With a determined nod, Ethan led the way back through the forest, keeping to the shadows and avoiding the main paths. When they reached the edge of the forest, Ethan stopped. His house was just ahead, a small, cozy building with a garden out front. Smoke curled from the chimney, and he could hear the faint sound of his mother humming a tune in the kitchen. "Wait here," he whispered to Lyra. "I'll make sure it's safe, then I'll come back for you." Lyra nodded, staying hidden among the trees as Ethan walked up to his house. He entered quietly, trying to act as normal as possible. His mother looked up as he came in, a smile on her face. "There you are, Ethan. You were out early today," she remarked, turning back to the stove. "I've made breakfast. Go wash up and sit down." Ethan nodded, feeling a twinge of guilt for what he was about to do. "I'll be right back," he said, heading upstairs to his room. Once he was sure his mother was occupied, he slipped back outside and signaled for Lyra to follow him. Quietly, they made their way into the house and up to Ethan's room. It was a small, simple space with a bed, a desk, and a few posters on the wall. Lyra looked around, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. "You can stay here," Ethan said, closing the door behind them. "No one comes in without asking. Just try to keep quiet, okay?" Lyra nodded, though she still seemed curious about everything. "Your home is warm," she observed, touching the soft blanket on the bed. Ethan smiled slightly, relieved that she seemed comfortable. It's not much, but it's safe. I'll bring you food and anything else you need." As the day went on, Ethan did his best to keep Lyra hidden. He brought her food from the kitchen, made sure his family didn't suspect anything, and answered her many questions about life on Earth. Lyra, for her part, was fascinated by everything she saw. The way humans interacted, the emotions they displayed so openly, it was all new to her, and she wanted to understand it all. At one point, Ethan brought Lyra downstairs while his mother was out running errands. He showed her the living room, with its warm fireplace and comfortable furniture. Lyra marveled at the family photos on the wall, the small knickknacks that filled the shelves. "What are these?" she asked, pointing to a picture of Ethan and his parents. "That's a photo," Ethan explained. "It's a way to capture a moment in time, to remember people and places." Lyra studied the photo intently, as if trying to absorb the emotions behind it. "Your family. They seem very close," she remarked, a hint of something wistful in her voice. "We are," Ethan replied, feeling a pang of homesickness even though he was home. He couldn't imagine life without his family, the warmth and love that filled every corner of their house. Lyra's gaze softened as she continued to look around. "It's different from my world," she said quietly. We don't have this. We don't feel like this." Ethan frowned, trying to imagine what that must be like. A world without love, without family, it seemed impossible to him. "That sounds lonely," he said, unable to find a better word. Lyra didn't respond immediately. She seemed lost in thought, as if trying to process the emotion she had never known. Finally, she nodded. It is, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. As the day turned to evening, Ethan noticed that Lyra was becoming more attuned to the emotions around her. She watched him and his family closely, as if trying to learn from their interactions. At dinner, Ethan's mother noticed that he was more distracted than usual. "Ethan, is everything all right?" she asked, a hint of concern in her voice. Ethan quickly nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired, I guess." His mother seemed to accept this, but Ethan could see the worry in her eyes. He knew he had to be more careful. Any slip-up could lead to questions he wasn't ready to answer. Later that night, as they sat in his room, Ethan noticed that Lyra seemed more subdued. "What's wrong?" he asked gently. Lyra looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I've never felt this way before," she admitted. "Being here, with you and your family, it's making me feel things I didn't know I could feel." "Is that a bad thing?" Ethan asked, concerned. "I don't know," Lyra replied honestly. "It's overwhelming. But also, it's nice. I think I like it." Ethan smiled, relieved. "It's okay to feel, Lyra. It's part of being human. You don't have to be afraid of it." Lyra looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Thank you, Ethan," she said softly, "for helping me, for showing me this." As the night wore on, the bond between them deepened. They talked about their worlds, their lives, and the challenges they both faced. For Lyra, it was a chance to explore the emotions she had long suppressed. For Ethan, it was an opportunity to understand this mysterious being who had entered his life. But as they grew closer, the town grew more suspicious. Unexplained occurrences, whispers of strange lights and sounds in the forest, people were starting to talk. Ethan knew they had to be careful, but he couldn't bring himself to send Lyra away. Not now, when she was just beginning to understand what it meant to feel. And so, they continued their secret life, hidden from the world, yet connected in a way that neither of them fully understood. As they faced the challenges ahead, they knew that they had each other, and that, for now, was enough. The town hall was filled with a low murmur as the townspeople gathered, their faces a mix of concern and curiosity. The news of strange lights and noises in the forest had spread quickly, and now, under the dim light of the overhead lamps, fear began to take root. Mr. Thompson, the town's mayor, stood at the front, trying to calm the rising tension. Now, everyone, let's not jump to conclusions. We don't know what those lights were. It could be anything, maybe some kids playing a prank." "But what if it's something more?" Mrs. Callahan interjected, her voice tinged with worry. "We've never seen anything like this before. What if it's dangerous?" The room fell silent as the weight of her words hung in the air. The townspeople exchanged uneasy glances, their thoughts drifting to the possibility of the unknown lurking so close to their homes. Ethan sat quietly in the back, his heart pounding in his chest. He had known this day would come, but it was too soon. The town's fear was growing, and it wouldn't be long before someone decided to take action. His mind raced with thoughts of Lyra, hidden away in the forest, isolated from the world that now seemed ready to turn against her. He had to protect her. That night, Ethan returned to the forest, the darkness enveloping him as he made his way to the small cave where Lyra waited. She stood as he approached, her expression calm but her eyes reflecting the anxiety she could sense from him. "They're getting closer," Lyra Ethan said, his voice strained. "The town is scared. They're starting to think something dangerous is out here." Lyra nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I can feel their fear," she replied softly. "It's overwhelming." Ethan hesitated, his mind torn between what he knew he had to do and the danger it posed. "We have to move you, at least for now. The forest might not be safe anymore." Lyra looked at him, sensing his worry and determination. She knew how much he was risking by helping her, and the thought of being the cause of his distress pained her in ways she was only beginning to understand. "Where will we go?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan took a deep breath. "There's a deeper part of the forest, farther away from town. We can hide there, at least until things calm down." Together they left the cave, moving through the forest under the cover of night. The trees loomed overhead, their branches creating shadows that danced in the moonlight. Lyra followed Ethan closely, her senses heightened by the tension in the air. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig seemed louder, more ominous. As they moved deeper into the forest, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He tried to push the thought away, focusing instead on getting Lyra to safety. But the feeling persisted, a gnawing unease that made his heart race. Finally, they reached a secluded area, hidden away from the main paths. The trees here were older, their trunks thick and gnarled, offering a natural barrier from prying eyes. Ethan led Lyra to a small hollow beneath one of the trees, a place he had found years ago while exploring. "This should be safe," he said, trying to sound reassuring. "No one comes out here." Lyra nodded, though she could sense the fear that still lingered in him. "Thank you, Ethan," she said softly, "for everything." Ethan managed a small smile. "I just want to make sure you're safe," he replied. "We'll figure this out." As they settled into the hollow, the silence of the forest closed in around them. Lyra sat quietly, her thoughts drifting back to the town and the fear she had felt emanating from its people. It was a new sensation for her, one she had never experienced on her homeworld. Fear, pain, isolation, it was all so overwhelming, so unlike anything she had known before. But there was something else, something that came from Ethan. A warmth, a sense of protection that eased the ache she felt. It was strange and comforting all at once, and she found herself drawn to it, even as she struggled to understand it. "Lyra," Ethan said suddenly, breaking the silence, "I need you to promise me something." Lyra looked at him, her expression curious. "What is it?" "Promise me that if things get too dangerous, you'll leave. You'll find somewhere safe, away from the town." Lyra hesitated, sensing the fear behind his words. She knew he was asking her to abandon him if it came to that, to save herself. But the thought of leaving him behind, of being alone again, filled her with a dread she couldn't explain. "I promise," she said finally, though the words felt hollow. She wasn't sure if she could keep that promise, not when everything inside her told her to stay close to him. The night wore on, and the forest around them remained quiet. But in the distance, the town was far from silent. The fear that had taken root there was growing, spreading like wildfire, and it wouldn't be long before that fear turned to action. As Ethan and Lyra sat together in the darkness, they both knew that the peace they had found was fragile, hanging by a thread. The town's fear was a powerful force, one that could drive people to do terrible things. And soon, they would have to face it. But for now, they were together, and that was enough. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft golden light over the forest, when Ethan and Lyra found themselves in a hidden glade, a place untouched by time. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers, and the sound of birds singing greeted the dawn. It was a place of peace, far removed from the tension that hung over the town. Ethan sat on the soft grass, watching as Lyra walked slowly through the glade, her steps light and graceful. There was something different about her, something in the way she moved, the way she seemed to be absorbing everything around her. "Ethan," Lyra said quietly, turning to face him. "This place, it feels different." Ethan nodded, understanding what she meant. "It's like it's separate from everything else," he replied. "Like it's safe here." Lyra smiled slightly, a rare expression that seemed almost out of place on her usually composed face. But there was something in her eyes, something soft and uncertain, that made Ethan's heart ache. "What are you thinking?" he asked gently, sensing that she had something on her mind. Lyra hesitated, her gaze dropping to the ground. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," she began slowly. "About leaving if things get too dangerous." Ethan felt a pang of guilt, knowing that his words had weighed heavily on her. "I just want to make sure you're safe, Lyra," he said softly. "I don't want anything to happen to you." Lyra looked up at him, her eyes reflecting a deep sadness. "But what if I don't want to leave?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I want to stay? With you?" The words hung in the air between them, heavy with emotion. Ethan felt his breath catch in his throat, his mind racing to process what she had just said. He had known, on some level, that their bond was growing stronger, but hearing it out loud, hearing her say that she wanted to stay with him, was something else entirely. "Lyra," he began, his voice shaky. I don't know what to say." Lyra moved closer to him, her expression both determined and vulnerable. "I'm starting to feel things, Ethan," she said softly. "Things I never thought I could feel, and it's because of you." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he looked into her eyes, seeing the raw emotion there. He reached out, taking her hand in his, feeling the warmth of her touch. "I feel the same way," he admitted. "I care about you, Lyra. I don't want to lose you." For a moment they sat in silence, the weight of their words settling over them. The world around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them in the quiet of the glade. "I don't understand everything I'm feeling," Lyra continued, her voice trembling slightly. "But I know that I don't want to be alone anymore. I don't want to go back to a life without this. Without you." Ethan's heart ached at the vulnerability in her voice, at the way she was opening up to him in a way she never had before. He knew how much this meant to her, how much she was risking by letting herself feel. "You don't have to go back to that," he said firmly, his grip on her hand tightening. "We'll figure this out together. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Lyra's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and she nodded slowly, her heart swelling with a warmth she had never known. She didn't fully understand what was happening to her, but she knew that she didn't want it to end. For the first time in her life, she felt truly alive. As they sat together in the glade, the sun rose higher in the sky, casting a warm glow over them. Lyra leaned into Ethan, resting her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. It was a small comfort, but it meant everything to her. Ethan wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close, feeling the same need to protect her that had driven him from the beginning. But now, it was more than just protection, it was love, pure and simple. And it terrified him as much as it comforted him. They stayed like that for a long time, simply being together, letting the world outside the glade fade away. But even as they found solace in each other, they both knew that this peace couldn't last forever. The town's fear was still out there, growing stronger with each passing day, and it was only a matter of time before it found them. But for now, they held on to the moment, onto each other, drawing strength from the bond they had formed. And in that quiet glade, far from the eyes of the world, Lyra began to truly understand what it meant to feel, to love, and to be loved in return. As the day wore on, Ethan and Lyra knew they had to leave the glade, to return to the reality that awaited them. But the time they had spent together had changed them both, deepening their connection and solidifying the feelings they shared. As they made their way back through the forest, the warmth of the glade still lingered in their hearts, giving them the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. But as they approached the edge of the forest, Ethan's heart sank. In the distance, he could see people moving through the trees, searching, their voices carrying through the still air. "The town," Ethan whispered, his voice filled with dread. "They're looking for us." Lyra's heart raced as she realized the danger they were in. The fear she had felt from the town was closing in, and she knew that if they were found, there would be no escape. "We have to go," Ethan said urgently, taking her hand and pulling her back into the cover of the trees. "We can't let them find us." Together they moved quickly and quietly through the forest, the fear of discovery propelling them forward. But as they fled, Lyra's mind raced with thoughts of the bond they had just formed, the emotion she was still trying to understand. She couldn't lose this, not now, not after everything. As they reached a deeper part of the forest, Ethan slowed down, his breath coming in heavy gasps. "We should be safe here," he said, his voice laced with uncertainty. Lyra nodded, though her mind was still reeling. The fear she had felt from the town was nothing compared to the fear of losing what she had found with Ethan. But as she looked at him, saw the determination in his eyes, she knew that they would find a way to make it through this together. As they settled into their new hiding place, the sounds of the search party faded into the distance, leaving them alone once more. But the weight of what they had just experienced hung heavy in the air, a reminder that their time was running out. But despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, Lyra felt a new sense of resolve. She had found something precious here on Earth, something she had never thought possible, and she would do whatever it took to protect it. As night fell, Ethan and Lyra huddled together, their bond stronger than ever. And though the darkness outside was filled with danger, the light of their connection gave them hope. The night air was thick with tension as Lyra and Ethan stood in the clearing where she had first landed. The soft glow of the moon illuminated the area, casting long shadows across the ground. But tonight, the familiar stillness was shattered by the sudden appearance of a massive, imposing spacecraft descending from the sky. The ship dwarfed Lyra's own vessel, its sleek, metallic surface reflecting the pale light. As it touched down with a muted thud, the ground beneath their feet trembled. Lyra's heart raced as she recognized the insignia on the side, a mark of the Interstellar Council, the governing body of her people. They had come for her. Ethan gripped her hand tightly, his eyes wide with fear. "Lyra, what's happening? Who are they?" Lyra took a deep breath, steadying herself. "It's the Council," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "They've come to take me back." A ramp extended from the ship, and a group of figures emerged, their forms tall and cloaked in shadows. The leader, a stern-faced woman with sharp, angular features, stepped forward, her eyes locking onto Lyra. "Lyra," the leader called out, her voice cold and authoritative. "You have delayed your mission for too long. You must return with us immediately." Ethan felt a surge of panic. "No, you can't take her," he shouted, stepping in front of Lyra protectively. The leader's gaze shifted to Ethan, her expression unreadable. "Human," she said disdainfully, "you do not understand what is at stake. Lyra has a duty to our species, a duty that cannot be compromised." Lyra's heart ached as she looked at Ethan, his face pale with fear and determination. She knew how much he was risking by standing up to the Council, and the thought of being forced to leave him behind filled her with dread. "Please," Ethan pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. "Don't take her away. She's changed. She's not the same as when she first came here." The leader's eyes narrowed. "Changed? What do you mean?" Lyra stepped forward, her voice firm but tinged with emotion. "I've experienced something new here," she began, choosing her words carefully. "Something that I was not prepared for. I felt emotions, love, fear, pain, things that were unknown to me before." The leader's expression hardened. "Emotions are irrelevant to our mission. They weaken our resolve and compromise our goals." "No," Lyra interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "They don't weaken us. They make us stronger. They give us something to fight for, something to protect. I've learned that here with Ethan." Ethan's heart swelled with hope as he listened to Lyra's words. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the struggle between her duty and the emotions that had become so important to her. The leader remained unmoved. "You were sent here to ensure the survival of our species, not to indulge in human weaknesses. You must choose, Lyra, return with us and fulfill your duty, or face the consequences." Lyra's mind raced as she weighed her options. She knew what the consequences would be. Disobedience to the council was a grave offense, one that could lead to exile or worse. But the thought of abandoning the emotion she had discovered, the bond she had formed with Ethan, was unbearable. Ethan, sensing her turmoil, spoke up again. "If you have to go, then take me with you," he said, his voice trembling with determination. "We can find a way to make this work together. I won't let you face this alone." Lyra's heart soared at his words, but she knew the council would never allow it. They were rigid, unyielding in their adherence to protocol. But Ethan's bravery, his willingness to stand by her no matter the cost, filled her with a resolve she hadn't known she possessed. She turned to the leader, her gaze steady. "I cannot return with you," she said, her voice resolute. "I've found something here, something that gives my life meaning. I won't abandon it." The leader's expression darkened. "You realize what you're saying, Lyra? You are choosing to defy the council, to forsake your duty." Lyra nodded. "Yes, I understand the consequences, but I cannot ignore what I've learned, what I've felt. I choose to stay." The leader's eyes flashed with anger, but she remained composed. "Very well, Lyra. You have made your choice. But know this, your actions will have repercussions, not just for you, but for the entire species. The council does not take defiance lightly." With that, the leader turned on her heel, signaling for the others to follow. The figures retreated into the ship, the ramp retracting behind them. As the engines roared to life, the ship began to lift off, ascending into the night sky. Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding, his legs trembling as the ship disappeared from view. He turned to Lyra, relief flooding through him. "You did it," he whispered, pulling her into a tight embrace. "You chose to stay." Lyra wrapped her arms around him, holding him close. "I couldn't leave you, Ethan. Not after everything we've been through." But even as they stood there, holding each other in the clearing, Lyra knew that the council's threat was far from over. They had defied the most powerful force in her species, and the consequences would surely come. But for now, they had each other, and that was enough. As they made their way back to the safety of the forest, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The town, the council, everything seemed to be closing in on them. But Lyra's choice, her decision to stay with him, gave him a renewed sense of hope. They had defied the odds, stood up to forces far greater than themselves, and emerged stronger for it. Whatever came next, they would face it together, their bond unbreakable. The warmth of Ethan's home was a stark contrast to the tension that filled the air. Lyra and Ethan sat in his small living room, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. But the comfort of the familiar surroundings did little to ease the weight on their hearts. The townspeople had grown restless, their fear morphing into anger. Rumors had spread about the strange occurrences in the forest, and it wasn't long before the town's leaders issued an ultimatum: Lyra had to leave, or they would take matters into their own hands. Lyra sat quietly, her gaze fixed on the flames dancing in the fireplace. The memories of the council's visit still haunted her, the threat of their wrath hanging over her like a dark cloud. But it was the town's ultimatum that weighed most heavily on her mind. She had seen the fear in their eyes, the same fear that had driven her own people to the brink of destruction. Ethan, sensing her distress, reached out and took her hand in his. "We'll figure this out, Lyra," he said softly. "I won't let them hurt you." Lyra squeezed his hand, grateful for his reassurance, but she knew the situation was growing more dire by the hour. The town's fear was palpable, and it wouldn't be long before it turned into violence. As the night wore on, they knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. The council's threat loomed large, and the town's ultimatum was a ticking time bomb. They had to make a decision, a final, irrevocable choice that would determine their fate. "Ethan," Lyra said quietly, breaking the silence, "I don't want to put you in danger. If the town finds out that you've been hiding me, they might come after you too." Ethan shook his head, his expression resolute. "I don't care about the risks, Lyra. I care about you. We've come this far together, and I'm not going to abandon you now." Lyra's heart swelled with emotion, the bond between them stronger than ever. But she couldn't ignore the reality of their situation. The council had given her a final ultimatum to return to her people or face the consequences. And now, the town had issued their own ultimatum. There was no escaping it. "We could leave," Ethan suggested, his voice filled with a mix of hope and desperation. "We could run away, find somewhere safe where they can't find us." Lyra considered his words, the possibility of a new life far from the threats that surrounded them. But deep down, she knew that running would only delay the inevitable. The council would never stop searching for her, and the town's fear would never truly go away. "No matter where we go, the council will find us," Lyra said, her voice tinged with sadness. "And the town, they'll never stop fearing what they don't understand." Ethan's shoulders slumped, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "Then what do we do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra took a deep breath, her mind racing as she considered their options. There was only one choice left, a choice that would mean leaving everything behind: their home, their lives, their love. But it was the only way to protect Ethan, the only way to ensure that he wouldn't be harmed because of her. "We have to leave Earth," Lyra said finally, the words heavy on her tongue. "It's the only way to keep you safe." Ethan looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of shock and sadness. "Leave Earth? But how? Where would we go?" Lyra's heart ached as she saw the pain in his eyes, but she knew there was no other choice. "We can take my ship," she explained. "I don't know where we'll go, but we'll find a place where we can be safe, where we can start over." The thought of leaving everything behind: his home, his family, the life he had known, was almost too much to bear. But as he looked at Lyra, at the love and determination in her eyes, he knew that he couldn't let her go. Not now, not ever. "I'll go with you," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Wherever we go, I'll be with you." Lyra felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, the weight of his words sinking in. She had never imagined that she would find someone willing to sacrifice everything for her, someone who would stand by her side no matter the cost. "Thank you, Ethan," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't deserve you." Ethan shook his head, pulling her into his arms. "You deserve everything, Lyra, and I'm going to make sure you have it." The fire crackled softly as they held each other, the reality of their decision settling over them. They knew that leaving Earth would be the hardest thing they had ever done, but it was the only way to protect what they had found together. The next morning, as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Lyra and Ethan prepared to leave. They packed what little they could carry, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that they might never return. Before they left, Ethan took one last look around his home, the place that had been his sanctuary for so long. The memories of his life here flooded back, each one tinged with the bittersweet knowledge that it was all coming to an end. "I'll miss this place," Ethan said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'd rather be with you than stay here without you." Lyra nodded, her own heart aching with the knowledge of what they were leaving behind. But she knew that as long as they were together, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. As they stepped outside, the cool morning air filled their lungs, the world around them still and quiet. They made their way to the clearing where Lyra's ship was hidden, the reality of their decision pressing down on them with every step. When they reached the ship, Lyra hesitated, her heart heavy with the weight of what she was about to do. "Are you sure about this, Ethan?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Once we leave, there's no going back." Ethan nodded, his resolve unwavering. "I'm sure. I want to be with you, Lyra. Wherever we go, we'll face it together." With a deep breath, Lyra activated the ship's controls, the engines humming to life. As the ramp extended, she took one last look at the world they were leaving behind, the place where they had found each other. "Goodbye," she whispered, a single tear sliding down her cheek. They boarded the ship, the ramp retracting behind them as the engines roared to life. As the ship lifted off the ground, the town below began to stir, the early morning light revealing the faces of the people who had unknowingly driven them away. As they ascended into the sky, Lyra and Ethan watched as the world they had known grew smaller and smaller, until it was nothing but a distant memory. They held each other close, the warmth of their connection the only thing grounding them in the vastness of space. As the stars stretched out before them, Lyra knew that the journey ahead would be long and difficult, filled with unknown challenges and dangers. But as she looked at Ethan, at the love in his eyes, she knew that they would face it all together. "Wherever we go," Lyra whispered, her voice filled with determination, "we'll find a way." Ethan nodded, his hand wrapped tightly around hers. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice steady. "We'll build a new life together, no matter what it takes." As they sped into the vastness of space, leaving Earth far behind, Lyra and Ethan knew that they had chosen the only path that could keep them together. It was a path filled with uncertainty, but it was also filled with hope. And in that hope, they found the strength to face whatever came next, knowing that as long as they had each other, they could overcome anything. The vastness of space stretched out before them, an endless expanse of stars and darkness. Inside the ship, Lyra and Ethan sat quietly, side by side, as they left Earth behind. The familiar blue planet grew smaller and smaller until it was nothing but a distant speck in the black void. For a moment, both of them felt the weight of what they were leaving behind: their home, their past, and the lives they had known. But with that weight came a sense of relief, a new freedom. They had chosen each other, defying both the Interstellar Council and the fears of the human community. Now, they were on a journey into the unknown together. Lyra's hand rested in Ethan's, the warmth of his touch grounding her in the cold emptiness of space. She glanced at him, taking in the determined expression on his face. Despite everything they had faced, he was still here, still with her. And that knowledge filled her with a sense of peace she had never known. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, tinged with concern. Lyra nodded, her gaze drifting back to the stars outside. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm just thinking about everything that's happened, everything we've been through." Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "It's been a lot," he admitted, "but we made it. We're together, and that's what matters." Lyra smiled, the warmth of his words soothing the lingering doubts in her mind. She had been so focused on the mission when she first arrived on Earth, so certain of her duty to her species. But now, everything had changed. The emotions she had discovered, the bond she had formed with Ethan, these were things she could never have imagined, and they had become more important to her than anything else. "We've come this far," Lyra said, echoing Ethan's earlier words. "We can face anything together." Ethan nodded, a determined look in his eyes. "This is just the beginning of our journey," he said, his voice filled with resolve. "We'll find a place where we can build a new life, where we can be free to live the way we want." As the ship traveled through the interstellar void, they talked about the future, about the possibilities that lay ahead, the challenges they might face. It was a conversation filled with both hope and uncertainty, but the underlying theme was always the same: they would face it together, no matter what. Hours passed, and the stars outside the ship seemed to blur into streaks of light as they entered hyperspace. The hum of the engines was a constant presence, a reminder of the journey they were on. But even in the vast emptiness of space, there was a sense of anticipation, of something new and unknown waiting just beyond the horizon. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the ship began to slow. The stars returned to their normal state, and a new world came into view, a planet unlike any they had ever seen. It was a vibrant sphere of greens and blues, teeming with life and possibilities. It was their new beginning. Lyra and Ethan stared at the planet in awe, the beauty of it taking their breath away. It was a place untouched by the conflicts and fears they had left behind, a place where they could start over, free from the constraints of their past. "This is it," Lyra whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "Our new home." Ethan nodded, his heart swelling with hope. "It's perfect," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. As the ship descended towards the planet, they could see more details: lush forests, sparkling oceans, and vast plains stretching out as far as the eye could see. It was a world full of life, full of promise. And it was theirs to explore, to make their own. The ship touched down gently on a grassy plain, the engines powering down with a soft hum. For a moment, neither of them moved, taking in the reality of where they were. This was their new beginning, a fresh start on a new world. Lyra was the first to step out of the ship, her feet touching the soft grass beneath her. The air was fresh and cool, filled with the scent of blooming flowers and the distant sound of running water. It was a world so different from Earth, yet it felt strangely familiar, as if it had been waiting for them all along. Ethan followed her, stepping out into the open air. The sky above was a deep blue, with fluffy white clouds drifting lazily across it. A gentle breeze ruffled his hair, and he closed his eyes, taking a deep breath of the clean, untainted air. This place. "It's incredible," he said, his voice filled with awe. Lyra nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon. "It's more than I ever could have imagined," she agreed. "A place where we can be free, where we can live without fear." They walked together, hand in hand, exploring the area around their landing site. The landscape was diverse rolling hills, dense forests, and clear rivers winding their way through the land. Everywhere they looked, there was beauty, a sense of peace and tranquility that they had never known before. As they walked, they talked about the future, about the life they would build together on this new world. There would be challenges, of course, but they were ready to face them, confident in the strength of their bond and the love they had found in each other. For Lyra, this world was more than just a new home. It was a place where she could fully embrace the emotions she had discovered, where she could live a life free from the constraints of her past. For Ethan, it was a chance to grow, to become the person he wanted to be, free from the fears and prejudices of his old life. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light over the landscape, they found a spot on a hill overlooking the valley below. They sat together, watching as the sky turned shades of pink and orange, the beauty of the moment filling them with a sense of contentment. "We did it," Ethan said softly, his arm wrapped around Lyra. "We found our place." Lyra leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Yes, we did," she replied, her voice filled with warmth. "And now we can start our new life, together." As the stars began to appear in the sky above, they sat in silence, taking in the beauty of the world around them. There was a sense of finality, of resolution, but also of new beginnings. They had left behind the fears and conflicts of their old lives, choosing instead to embrace the unknown, to forge a new path together. And in that moment, as they sat together on the hill, watching the stars rise in the sky, they knew that they had made the right choice. The journey ahead would be long and challenging, but they were ready for it. They had each other, and that was all they needed. As the night deepened and the world around them grew quiet, they stayed there, holding each other close, their hearts full of hope and love. This was their new beginning, a new life on a new world. And as they looked up at the stars, they knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, stronger and more connected than ever before.